Ashraf's head felt swimmy. His thoughts were slow and thick like slurry. Consciousness was slippery and slithered through his attempts to grasp it. Memories of earlier in the night were just outside his fingertips. He could see shards of his past, but they were gauzy and smeared. A name began to bubble up in the muck that he struggled in. John. Smothering darkness then engulfed him again. It took him a long time to realize that his eyes were even open. That his face had been crushed into something black. The smell of leather tickled his nostrils. He tried to speak, but found his mouth full of gravel, and his throat dusty. All that came out was an incomprehensible mumbling. It looks like he's waking up, chimed a deep, mirthless voice. That voice, it felt familiar, though. One of the blurry shards of earlier in the night began to clear. Ashraf had been at a bar. He was on a first date. A man in a flawless peacoat and blazer had been waiting for him. A drink already there. John. His name had been John. Ashraf recalled that he thought he had been handsome. All sharp angles, angelic blue eyes, and blonde hair meticulously styled. A sharp relief from his own soft face, slicked black locks, and earthy deep brown eyes. John had been so tall. When they hugged, he remembered he had hardly come up to his chest. But what had happened after they sat down to drink? His memories dissolved into a fine mist after that. You're so cute. Had a little too much, did we, Ashy? Asked the same cruel voice. Ash tried to pull himself up to sit. He wondered if perhaps he had simply overindulged. It wouldn't have been the first time. With any luck, he hadn't said anything acutely embarrassing. His muscles worked to right himself, but he found them locked into place. As the stupor subsided, it was replaced by an ache in his limbs. The more he tried to move, the faster he realized he couldn't. His body was held fast by restraints. He couldn't see, but could certainly feel. Now don't get too excited back there. You don't want me to have to pull this car over. Panic started to cascade through Ash. He tried to turn his head, but couldn't see much in the shadowy vehicle. Heaving himself around, he managed to fall to his side. His hand brushed against the plush seat. He tried to unfurl his legs, but when he did, they painfully jerked his arms, and his shoulders cried in anguish. It was then he understood that he had been tied up, painfully hogtied like some kind of livestock. He tried to shout, but he discovered a gag taped over his mouth. I thought I told you to behave back there. The icy voice dripped with venom. Ash pleaded with his captor. Sorry, I can't understand you. John peered into the back seat with a toothy smile that curled onto his lips. Tonight's fishing trip had been enormously successful. He had bagged himself a real cutie this time. An Ashraf bin Osman, if his driver's license were to be believed. The man dressed in a black peacoat, suit, and leather gloves squeezed the wheel in anticipation. Suddenly his gray slacks felt snug, and his button-up a little too warm and restrictive. He alleviated this excitement by fantasizing about the night's events yet to come, by the fact that they were so tantalizingly close to his favorite spot. John grinded his teeth. He had been looking forward to this all week. Ash quit trying to speak. Instead, he looked through the front seat and surveyed the landscape displayed outside the windshield. The moon was bright and shone down over its snowy kingdom. Even with pregnant clouds obscuring the glowing Titan, it still burned against the night. Then Ash caught sight of mountains, and he began to feel not only frightened, but hopelessly lost. The bar he had met John at had been in the city, nowhere near the mountains. He wondered how long he had been knocked out for. However long it had been, they were now terrifyingly far from civilization and help. You had a little too much to drink at the bar. It was really quite adorable. So, I'm giving you a ride home. John shrugged. Just not your home. If his mouth didn't have a sock in it, Ash would have cursed his smug captor. Another memory sluiced through his mental fog. One of Ash getting up to use the restroom, now realizing he had left his drink with the seemingly nice stranger. After he returned and began to sip on his beer again, that was when his memories began to grow dark and lose shape. It dawned on him that the man driving him into desolation must have drugged him. He grew angry at himself for being so careless, was absolutely furious at the pompous fiend in the driver's seat. John Smith, how could he have been so naive? As Ash raked over the evening's events, the name was clearly a fake, a fraud to conceal this maniac's true identity should any of his victims escape. Terrified as he was, Ash had no intention of dying out in the tundra amongst the barren trees. His bonds were tight and secure. All he could do now is wait and hope an opening appeared in the ghastly series of events. This looks like a good spot, John crooned. He pulled the car onto the dirt shoulder next to the cracked and jagged asphalt, the tires resting beside the large snowbank that ran parallel with the country road. For Ash, being stopped happened to be significantly more frightening than driving into the unknown. His view from the back hadn't changed. It was nothing but gloomy skies and craggy peaks in the distance. Even if he could make a run for it, there would be nowhere for him to run to. John pulled the door handle and swung it open excitedly. He left the car running. This wouldn't take long, and he hated coming back to a cold seat. Now, it was time for the real fun to begin. He stepped to the back door, humming a little made-up tune, fingering the pistol in his coat pocket. A small affair, but sufficient to get the job done. He lifted the latch and pulled the door open to reveal his prey helplessly bound, his chocolate eyes brimming with fear. This was exactly the sort of scene John lived for. Now I'm going to cut you loose, but I would resist any clever ideas you may have. He pulled the gun from his pocket and brandished it for Ashram to see clearly. I'm a hell of a good shot. Do we understand each other? The tied man nodded slowly. John smiled. Good. With practiced fluidity, John pulled a knife out from somewhere hidden in his blazer, then placed the blade against the zip tie securing his victim. He pulled up, and the plastic snapped away. Ash's limbs flopped down to meet the leather seat. His joints felt stiff from being contorted awkwardly for so long. He thought briefly of trying to kick his captor and run for it. But the shining steel of the gun pointed at him made him abandon this thought. Instead, he pulled himself upright, rubbing his wrists. Get out. Ash tried to plead. This isn't a discussion. Get out. He motioned with the pistol for the man to move. Ash nodded. Then he began to scoot toward the open door. He swung his legs out onto the frosty pavement that lay below. It was the first time since being abducted that he felt the caustic bite of the cold. Even with his jacket, made up of a series of horizontal black bubbles, the sting of winter pierced through, while his top was covered in goose down encased in puffy, resilient fabric. His legs only had thin denim for protection. His feet were in woefully unseasonable brown boat shoes, made of absorbent fabric ready to take in the snow's watery kiss with every step. Ash hadn't anticipated a hike through the snow to be in his future tonight, but now the bitterness of the night was already beginning to seep through into his legs and feet. The frigid landscape was not what was on his mind, though. The only thing he concerned himself with was the lunatic with the gun. He shoved his ungloved hands into his pockets. "Nope, keep your hands where I can see them," John ordered with a voice as wintry as the snow beside them. His captive looked at him with pleading eyes, silently begging for him to grant him this one small mercy. John shook his head no. Ash sighed through his gag and pulled his hands out of his pockets, then held them up at eye level. "Good boy." John leveled the gun at Ash's face. Fear coursed through the abducted man, wondering if this would be the end, right here, by the side of the road. But then his tormentor swung the pistol to point at the tree line. Once more, he motioned for his victim to move. Ash's shoulders sagged in defeat. He eyed the bleak tundra in front of him. It was nothing but a lake of pristine snow that terminated at a wall of dead trees, dormant wooden towers, laying fallow until spring's warmth and rains would resurrect them. Reluctantly, Ash took his first uncertain step into the snow. His foot sunk deep into the drift until enough was packed down to form a base. Chunks of the powdery white ice tumbled into his shoe. It quickly melted against his skin, the sensation chilling him to his core. He cursed himself for not wearing socks. The second step was even worse, as his other formerly dry foot became encrusted in snow. John poked his gun into Ashraf's back to keep him moving. But even with the threat, walking through frosty dunes was a difficult task. The winds kicked up and sliced right through him. His fingers were becoming numb from having to hold them up. He stopped and shuddered, his body desperately trying to generate more warmth. But the freezing air sucked it out of him faster than he could make it. As he walked, Ash looked up at the sky above. He hadn't noticed before, but the dark clouds had been expanding, creeping over the stars and the moon as to blot out any of their ghostly radiance, intensifying the darkness, and with it any hope that a passerby could see the grisly ritual and intervene. Stormy puffs in the sky moved strangely. They seemed to crawl with an elusive purpose. It occurred to him that they were moving towards his captor and himself, against the wind. He was broken from his stargazing by another swift poke in the back. Ash relented and kept moving forward. His terror was mounting with every step toward the tree line. A sudden awareness that he would never see his family again cut through him like the icy wind. He felt an imperative urge to run, but he knew he would be shot dead before he even made it to the road. All he could do was wait and hope that things weren't as bleak as they seemed. After several more minutes of crunching through the treacherous terrain, the pair had made it to the tree line. Ash stopped and shivered compulsively. He couldn't remember a time when he had been so numb, that his body had been so bitten with polar wrath. Keep moving. Ash blanched and did as he was told. He looked up through the spindly dead tree branches as he did so. The shadowy mist that carpeted the sky was now directly above them, looking full to term with snow, ready to fill in their tracks and any trace that a crime had been committed. "This is far enough." The command pierced him with primal dread. "Now get on your knees." Ash continued to stand. It was clear there would be no escape, so why submit to any further humiliation? "I said, get on your knees!" John punctuated the order by driving the heel of his boot into Ash's hamstring. The imprisoned man buckled and then crumpled to his knees, his jeans instantly drenched in a crisp blanket of white. "Good boy." John put the gun to the back of Ash's head. "Take solace in the fact that your body will go to waste. We will still have fun, even if you won't know it. I promise you that no part of you will go to waste." A wolfish grin spread on the murderer's face. It was then that Ash noticed the first of the snowflakes begin to drift around them. Lazily they swirled in the air, seeming to move almost of their own accord, as if searching for something. Within seconds it became a fully blown flurry. He looked forward into the frozen forest. If he hadn't been about to be executed, he may have noticed that it wasn't snowing even 30 feet away from them. Instead, he thought if he was going to die out in the wilderness, at least it was a pretty night. Ash shut his eyes tightly, like a kid trying to will away the monsters under his bed. But the gun's cold steel remained placed between his bristling hair. His jaw clenched in anticipation of the end. But instead of a gunshot, he heard a scream. Then the barrel of the gun lifted from the back of his head. Ash swiveled to see what was going on behind him, to be greeted with his would-be murderer walking slowly backward, his leather-gloved hand swatting at his neck, as if trying to crush a particularly aggressive mosquito. John roared in pain and rage. He pointed the gun at Ash again. The furious killer pulled the trigger right as another swarm of snowflakes fell onto his exposed wrist. The pain involuntarily caused him to jerk the gun up as a bullet flew free. Instinctively, Ash fell backward to avoid the shot, but the bullet hadn't even been close. The shot went wide and slammed into an unseen tree in the darkness beyond. The snow continued to fall as John's cries of anger transformed into pained howls and pleas for mercy. Ash rolled his butt from the frozen ice below and got onto unsteady feet. Before he began to run, he caught one final glimpse of John. The snow beneath him was now covered in droplets of blood, the white dunes beneath him greedily drinking up every drop that was spilt. Ash gawked at John's shirt beginning to pool with the red ichor, as if he had been shot himself. The last Ash saw of his former date was the malicious man crumbling to his knees in horror as the snow frenzied around him. Ash ran. He pumped his legs through the deep drifts as if he had been a track runner. The weakening screams of John nipped at his heels. He didn't dare look back or slow down. He could see the black sedan at the end of the field now. The sight urged him to work even faster. By the time he reached the car, the only cries Ash heard were those of the winter winds. The car was blissfully still running. He said a silent prayer for his captor's prissiness before sliding into the driver's seat and slamming the door behind him. It was only then did he have the temerity to look at the woods from where he had fled. Only now he couldn't see them. The entire area was blocked out by a curtain of falling white, as if a blizzard had focused its wrath only on one spot. Ash gazed in awe at the furious flurry before he realized it was beginning to crawl toward the car. This has been The Snow is Hungry, Part 1. Written and narrated by me, Remy Meloncello. Please like and subscribe. It really does mean the world to me. And join me next week for another terrifying tale. Until I see you next time, have a horrifying week.